Mindfulness is not just one kind of meditation, and it's not just meditation itself. There are a lot of different kinds of practices that have different results, different outcomes for the people who do them, and exercise that capability on a regular basis. Welcome to Mindfulness Voyage. My name is Ted Meissner. I'm glad you could be here. And in today's interview, we're going to be having a conversation about the research on different kinds of mindfulness practices and their outcomes. If you get something out of these, please do remember to subscribe to the podcast because it does make a difference and helps other people to find this as well. Our guest today is Rachel Gibson. Rachel, welcome to the podcast. Good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
It is so fascinating, and I'm eager to dive into our conversation for so many reasons, and particularly the work that you're doing. But before we get into that, if you could please just give us a little bit of background about who you are. What do you do in mindfulness?
Yeah, so I am currently almost at the end of my PhD of the last stretch. And I research basically how we engage with mindfulness interventions, mostly for kind of anxiety and depression. But yeah, my main interest is how can we make it more accessible? How can we get people to engage and get the benefits from it?
Great. And what is it that brought you into the orbit of mindfulness? Because people come to it from different ways. What is it that brought you into this?
Yeah, so for me, it was quite a personal thing actually. So I was studying psychology, but when I finished, I was actually really burnt out, kind of having physical symptoms of burnout that I guess a lot of people face. And my doctor actually said, hey, you're stuck in the fight or flight mode. Every time you try to relax or go to sleep, your body's saying, nope, there's like a threat, there's something going on. So he actually recommended try a mindfulness-based stress reduction course. So I joined it, and pretty much, I think it was about halfway through, or even just a little bit before halfway through, and like my symptoms just went away and I could sleep. And it was, for me, quite amazing because I think often, especially with mindfulness, it's not always that in your face. Often it is a bit more subtle and takes a bit longer, but for me it really was like me giving myself a chance to just relax and be present. So I think that really inspired me. I already was really interested in mental health. So then I thought about, I think it was during COVID actually, when a lot of people were talking about it. Everyone I knew was going through social anxiety, isolation, and everything like that. And I was exploring opportunities for studying, and I actually thought, no, this is what I want to do. I want to look at how we can bring mindfulness into, I guess, a non-clinical population. All these people out there experiencing that don't actually have access to support. So yeah, that's kind of how I came into it.
Thank you for telling that story. And it's so consistent with what I hear time and again. I've done over 500 interviews in this field, and
Yeah.
and there are these really wonderful stories of how it can be transformative in your
Mm-hmm.
life, and not just those who are in a clinical setting, but for people
Mm-hmm.
outside of that. And you also mentioned accessibility too. And I've
Mm-hmm.
done several episodes and will continue to do episodes about accessibility and ensuring that folks who are having difficulty just finding mindfulness
Mm-hmm.
of some kind, because there are a lot of different varieties of it, that's helpful to them, that we have that available and that they can get to it. So thank you for bringing that up. And I want to hear about your research. It's a few different things. You've got intervention,
Yeah.
other impacting depression, anxiety, but also different practices and what those are like. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so what I'm working on at the moment is looking at, so there's so many wonderful research in the last however many years that show the potential benefits to mental health. But there are also a lot of kind of barriers to mindfulness. And I think that a lot of research faces, high dropout rates, people, especially people who really need it, if they haven't experienced mindfulness before, actually going through a kind of 8-week course often can be a lot. It can be really daunting. So I wanted to figure out, well, if it's can help everyone? Why is it not helping everyone? And how can we get more people involved? So how can we get mindfulness out there, like online interventions? Again, massive problems with people actually participating in them. So one of my studies is looking at a 8-week MBSR course online, and then looking at whether or not a shorter pre-exposure to a mindfulness course would potentially help people kind of go on to increase their engagement with a longer practice. So participants start off with a short 4-week course, and it will either be in movement-based mindfulness or seated. And then what we do is we collect data on, previous experience, attitudes towards mindfulness, lots of kind of demographic variables like age, gender, culture, all these different things. And then we basically see if the pre-exposure helps to improve engagement with the 8-week. And then we also have a kind of control group that don't go through the 4-week one. And, previous research has shown that potentially it can really help people to do movement-based mindfulness if they don't have experience with mindfulness. Because obviously there's a lot of research on the benefits, but it can actually also be really hard. And there are also a lot of adverse effects. You are starting to become more aware of thoughts and emotions that are under the surface. And it can be actually quite confronting. Which is a barrier. So people kind of think, oh, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to feel great, relaxation. They do it, and it's actually not very nice to begin with. So getting people maybe involved in more of a movement-based might be potentially a way to get around that barrier. So we kind of want to look at that and see, and then hopefully find out some more about whether there are certain aspects or attributes of people that make them more suitable to one or the other. So that's what I'm currently analyzing at the moment. So we don't quite have the results yet, but I'm really looking forward to finding out more about that.
That is so interesting because these different aspects of what you're talking about, things like adverse effects, and having movement practices, so you're still engaged in a fully mindfulness-based practice that may be a nicer toe in the water instead of look at how crazy your mind is going, active all the time, which can be really, really difficult for many people who might not yet have learned how to do a little bit of self-regulation. And a little bit of pausing and a little bit of choice around how they are, all this good stuff from trauma-sensitive mindfulness. One of the things I will say for those who may be watching, this is the first time you've ever encountered mindfulness at all, and you're like, adverse effects, oh my goodness, and you're home alone thing, is that when we say adverse effects, these can be the adverse effects that are expected and part of why we're doing the practice. Like we're encountering, some sadnesses, some difficulties in our lives, and we're turning towards them so we can work with them. So they are noticed, so it can have change in our lives around them. So we're not saying that every adverse effect is one that is a debilitating kind of thing. Those can occur too. I will absolutely continue to push on and there are reasons for that that have to do with teacher training and not having trauma-sensitive mindfulness training of the teachers and all kinds of different things like that. Again, that mindfulness itself is not causing those effects. Mindfulness may be revealing that stuff is there and needs to be dealt with and can be done in a way that is really attentive to the well-being of participants. So I just want to bring that up. People may be seeing this for the first time and getting a bit of a shocked expression.
Exactly.
Say a bit more. I mean, what are you encountering with all of this? What are you finding in the research, and not even just publishable research, but you as a person, what are you finding as you do this work?
So I mean, I guess what we're trying to do is that, so this particular study it's online. So you don't have the same I guess it's trying to make sure that we put in place the support, right? That people can work through these things and do it and feel supported and feel comfortable. We wouldn't want, people kind of doing mindfulness for the first time, not really knowing what's expected. So we do try to give as much information as possible. It's very much one of those studies that you're not tricked into anything. It's very much all laid out on the table. But yeah, I've had really positive feedback about it. And another element actually that we add is that at the end of the study, we also ask our participants, how did you experience it? What are your attitudes now? Are you likely to kind of go on and carry on? Which I think can sometimes be slightly overlooked in research, that we focus very much on the data and the numbers, when actually, if you want to know what helps people engage, sometimes you can just ask. So adding that kind of qualitative aspect to research, I think is so valuable, especially with something like engagement and attitudes towards a practice. So we're definitely trying to approach it from a holistic point of view. But yeah, the feedback we've been getting definitely is from a lot of people. So a lot of my participants are university students that haven't experienced mindfulness before. So they've heard about it, but they haven't actually done it. And they, as you know, university can be quite stressful. So it's definitely seems to have helped. So I mean, I obviously don't want to say anything for sure, because until we, as a scientist, until we get that data. But yeah, the general feedback has been really positive, and also just in kind of giving people a taste of it, and then people can kind of take that on and go with it where they want to go. Which is great, because we talk a lot about, going for a walk and kind of mindful walking and these kind of things that you don't have to only do in a setting at home. You can actually take, especially movement-based mindfulness, you can take that into anywhere. Which kind of takes me into my other study that I'm doing, which looks at mindfulness in nature, which is something I'm also very passionate about. So yeah, I mean, especially again, take us back to COVID, people really realized how time outside and time spent in nature has a huge impact on our mental well-being. And research out there has found that it reduces ruminative thinking, which is kind of repeated negative thoughts, which I'm sure we've all been there, when you've maybe done something wrong, or you keep going over and over again in your head and you get stuck into a bit of a loop. And that is something that's really connected to bad mental health or depression, anxiety. Time spent in nature has been found to really reduce that, as well as mindfulness interventions have also been found to reduce it. So what I am looking at is whether or not there's a potential kind of combined effect, that when we actually practice mindfulness in a nature setting, is there going to be that bigger reduction in rumination and bigger boosts in kind of mental well-being, which is still ongoing, still collecting data for that one. But I think it's, I don't know, almost like the perfect time to be doing this kind of research, because if I think, if we were doing this maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I think people would have maybe like more reservations about going into this and everything. But I guess because of the pandemic and everything, people are so on board with it and so excited to be a part of it. So yeah, I'm enjoying finding out more about that.
That is wonderful, and it sounds like I would make the guess that yes, there's an additive effect, but and this comes from the idea that having been really wound up too tightly, shall we say, but being an outdoorsy guy is like, yeah, that had some effect. But then when mindfulness was added into that picture, it made a very big difference, because it was encountering the natural world in a different way, one that I hadn't before, and everything else too, just the natural world. So, Rachel, what are you curious about next? After these particular projects are done, what are the things that you want to take a look at or see in the field of mindfulness that hasn't been studied yet? Or what do you want to dig into a little bit more?
Yeah, so I think for me, I'd love going forwards. I really want to, I guess, see how we can implement the findings that we're kind of finding. And I mean, there's new stuff coming out all the time and everything, but I think my real passion is that kind of accessibility and actually the impact of the research. So, you know, we're researching this stuff, we're finding out that's great. How can we actually get that out there to people and actually see it making a change or making a difference in the real world? So I don't know exactly what that looks like, but yeah, I definitely want to, I don't know, also just try to focus on, there's so much happening that is kind of, I guess, on Google Scholar and it's very much in the academic world, and actually making that accessible, just even the research, making that accessible to people so people can learn about the benefits, can learn the skills, apply it to their everyday life. So definitely want to be involved in that, but not 100% sure how it will end up.
Yeah, and it's a relatively new field. I mean, the
Mm,
having these kinds of secular programs is about 40 years. And while
mm,
that may sound like a lot, it's really just the very beginning and based
yeah.
on, not to dismiss this, thousands of years of contemplative practices that are already in
Mhm.
place, and we're encountering them and engaging with them in new ways. So we're living in some ways, wonderfully interesting times. Well, for those who are watching the podcast, we'll have links where links are found. Our guest today, Rachel Gibson. Rachel, thank you so much for being here. Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you were tuning in and getting something out of our conversation. Please do remember to subscribe to this podcast. It helps a great deal, especially for other people to find this. Remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. And I'll see you next time on Mindfulness Voyage.